The Haunting Voices on the Long Road. My name is Michelle, a long-haul truck driver with many years of experience. Recently, I began hearing strange voices while driving alone. At first, I thought it was just fatigue and job stress. But as time went on, the voices became clearer and more frightening. That night, it was pouring rain, and visibility was severely reduced. I had been driving for hours and felt exhausted both physically and mentally. The whispers started again, this time clearer, as if someone was sitting right next to me, speaking into my ear. "Michelle, you can't escape us. We're always here." I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to focus on the road ahead. "It's just my imagination," I told myself. "It's just stress and lack of sleep." But the voices didn't stop. They became more urgent, more threatening. "Turn left, Michelle. Follow this path. Come with us." I shook my head, trying to dispel the voices. The road ahead was slippery and dangerous, and I knew I needed to concentrate. But the voices kept echoing, growing louder and more forceful. "You can't ignore us, Michelle. We know what you did." My heart raced, cold sweat dripping down my back. I hadn't done anything wrong, but a sense of guilt and fear overwhelmed me. The voices wouldn't stop, dragging me into a state of chaos and panic. As I struggled to focus, a sudden voice shouted, "Stop! Right now!" I jolted, losing control, and the truck swerved off the road. The vehicle crashed into a large rock on the roadside. Everything blurred, the sound of metal clashing and rain pouring echoed in my mind before I blacked out. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital, surrounded by nurses and doctors. A nurse looked at me with worried eyes. "You were in an accident. Your leg is broken, but fortunately you weren't severely injured. Locals discovered you and called for emergency help in time," she said. The memories of the eerie voices and the accident lingered vividly in my mind. I realized that I couldn't continue this job anymore. The haunting voices had pushed me into a dangerous situation, and I knew I needed a change. After recovering, I decided to quit long-haul driving and switch to a safer job. Although it wasn't easy, I knew it was the right decision to protect myself and avoid the terrifying hauntings that had plagued me for so long. The Nightmare on the Giang Pass. My name is Michael, an American tourist exploring Vietnam. One of the most impressive destinations on my journey was Giang, with its majestic mountains and winding passes. That night, when the rain was pouring heavily, I hired a local to take me back to my hotel after a long day of exploring. It was already dark, and the rain continued to fall, making the already dangerous mountain road even more treacherous. We moved slowly on the steep and slippery path, with the motorcycle's headlights illuminating only a small area ahead. The driver, named Min, tried to keep a steady grip on the handlebars, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "This road is really dangerous," I said, trying to make conversation to ease the tension. "Yes, but we'll be fine," Min replied, his voice filled with concern. We continued in silence, with only the sound of the rain and the engine echoing through the night. Suddenly, the front wheel slipped on the muddy surface, causing us to lose balance. Min tried to regain control, but it was too late. We were already falling off the edge of the pass. Everything happened so fast. I felt myself in free fall, crashing into bushes and sharp rocks. Min's scream mixed with the sound of the wind whistling past my ears. Finally, we came to a stop somewhere at the bottom of the pass, bruised and disoriented. I tried to get up, feeling pain all over my body. Min was lying next to me, injured but fortunately still conscious. "We have to find a way back to the main road," I said, my voice trembling. Min nodded, trying to stand up with my help. We started climbing, but the rain kept making everything more difficult. I felt desperate, wondering if anyone would find us in this dark night. Luckily, the noise we made attracted the attention of a group of locals passing by. They quickly came to us, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "What happened?" one of them asked, their voice full of concern. "We had an accident," Min replied, his breath ragged. "Please, help us." The locals immediately assisted us, helping us back to the main road. I felt relieved knowing we no longer had to face this ordeal alone. They took us to a nearby medical station where the staff was ready to treat our injuries. Lying on the hospital bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. This trip, which was supposed to be a thrilling adventure, had turned into a terrifying memory that I would never forget. Giang remained a beautiful and majestic place, but I would always remember that danger lurked in the most unexpected moments. Every night, working with my taxi, I usually encountered many different customers. But one rainy night, I met a strange passenger who completely changed my life. That evening, the rain was pouring down. The streets were deserted and wet, with only the streetlights shimmering in the rain. I was about to end my shift early because of the bad weather when I saw a man standing in the rain, waving for a taxi. He was dressed in black from head to toe, with a fedora hat covering his face. I stopped the car, opened the door, and he got in, bringing with him the chill of the rainy night. "Take me to the edge of the forest," he said in a deep, hoarse voice, his eyes hidden under the hat. I felt something was off, but still decided to take him. The road to the edge of the forest was quite far, and the deeper we went into the deserted road, the colder and more oppressive the atmosphere became. When we arrived, he asked me to wait. "Don't turn off the engine, wait for me here," he said, then opened the door and stepped out, disappearing into the rainy night. I watched as his silhouette vanished among the dense trees, a sense of unease rising within me. Sitting in the car, I could hear the rain pattering on the roof, feeling as though time was passing very slowly. About 20 minutes later, I started to hear strange sounds coming from the forest. They were whispers, initially soft but gradually becoming clearer and more eerie. "Did you see anything?" A voice from behind the car startled me. I turned around but saw no one. At this point, I was really panicking, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The whispers continued, sounding like someone arguing, one voice angry, the other trembling and scared. I rolled down the window and called out loudly, "Is anyone there? Do you need help?" But there was no response, only the sound of rain and the wind whistling through the trees. Suddenly, the car's engine died, plunging everything into silence. I tried to restart it, but to no avail. The car remained motionless. At that moment, I remembered the radio in the car. I turned it on and called the dispatch center, but received only silence in return. The radio was dead too, its battery drained. Left alone in the rainy night, I felt completely isolated. The whispers began again, this time clearer. "Don't do it. I know you're better than this." The voice was filled with tension and fear. I could no longer keep my composure, deciding to step out of the car to search for the strange passenger. I ventured deeper into the forest, following the direction I thought he had gone. But the farther I went, the more the voices seemed to recede, as if they were luring me deeper into the woods. The eerie silence was overwhelming, broken only by the rain falling on the leaves. After a while, I realized I was lost. The dense forest and darkness enveloped everything, and I no longer knew the way back to the car. Panic surged within me, but I didn't dare stop. I kept moving, hoping to find some trace of the passenger. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, tearing through the silence. My heart pounded, and I hid behind a bush, trying to listen. Could that gunshot be related to the strange passenger, or was I facing another danger in the forest? I continued forward and abruptly saw a trail of blood on the ground. I followed it, horrified to discover a shallow grave, freshly dug. Inside was a skeleton of a man, with a clear bullet wound in the chest. The strange thing was, the skeleton had been buried for many years. I stood still, trying to comprehend what was happening. The gunshot I heard earlier could have been the trace of a recent crime or a warning from a distant past. I felt a chill down my spine, realizing I was standing before a horrifying mystery. Suddenly, I heard the sound of an off-road vehicle in the distance. It was my colleagues from the dispatch center coming to help. I ran to the road and met them, recounting everything. The next morning, we, along with the police, returned to the scene to search the forest. The story ended with no clear explanation. I still wondered if the gunshot that night was real or just an illusion. And the strange passenger, who was he and where did he go? It all remained a terrifying and eerie mystery. A nightmare on the lonely road. My name is John, a truck driver with over 10 years of experience driving long hauls. One stormy night, I was driving down a deserted road, trying to complete my last delivery of the day. The rain was pouring down, the large raindrops pelting the windshield, severely limiting my visibility. The highway was empty, not a soul in sight, with only my headlights illuminating the dark road ahead. As I rounded a bend, I suddenly noticed a car parked across the road, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to assess the situation. I turned on my hazard lights and stepped out of the truck, cautiously approaching the car. Suddenly, from the shadows, a group of people emerged, their eyes revealing malicious intent. One of them stepped towards me, holding a large club. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just need some directions," he replied, but his eyes and tone made it clear that he was lying. "I think you should move on," I said, taking a step back, trying to keep a safe distance. But they had no intention of letting me go. Another man approached from behind, grabbed my shirt, and pulled me roughly. "Don't make this difficult. Just hand over the keys to the truck, and everything will be fine," he said, his voice menacing. My heart was racing, cold sweat running down my spine. I knew I had to act fast. With a sudden move, I pushed the man away and ran towards my truck. I heard shouts and the sound of footsteps chasing me from behind. But luckily, I managed to climb into the truck and lock the door. Without hesitation, I started the engine and floored the gas pedal, the truck speeding away into the storm, leaving the group behind. I only dared to breathe a sigh of relief when I saw the lights of a gas station in the distance, where I could stop and call the police. The police arrived quickly after receiving my call. They inspected the scene and discovered that the group had planned to attack and rob the goods in my truck. Fortunately, I had escaped unharmed, and they managed to catch one of the attackers, uncovering the entire plot. That night, as I sat in the truck, I couldn't stop shaking. Everything had happened so fast and was so terrifying. As a truck driver, I had encountered many dangerous situations on the road, but never had I experienced anything as frightening as this. From then on, I have always been more cautious whenever driving on deserted roads, especially on stormy nights. A haunting ride home. My name is James, and what I'm about to share still sends chills down my spine. It was a stormy night, rain pouring down relentlessly as I drove home after a long day at work. The roads were deserted, and the rhythmic pounding of the rain on my windshield created a hypnotic, almost eerie atmosphere. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure standing by the roadside, soaked to the bone, desperately waving for me to stop. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and rolled down the window just enough to hear him. "Please," the stranger pleaded, "I need a ride. My car broke down and there's no signal here." There was something off about him, but the rain and his desperate eyes pushed me to agree. "All right, get in," I said, unlocking the passenger door. He climbed in, dripping water all over the seat. As he settled in, I caught a glimpse of his face under the streetlights. He looked haggard and worn, his eyes darting around nervously. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "Just a few miles up the road," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for stopping. Not many would." As we drove on, the atmosphere in the car grew increasingly tense. The man's unease seemed to seep into the air, making me more alert and anxious. Trying to calm my nerves, I attempted to make small talk. "So, what brings you out here on a night like this?" He hesitated before answering. I had to leave. Something terrible happened back there." His eyes flicked towards the dark, rain-soaked road behind us. "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "There was an accident," he said, his voice trembling. I didn't know what to do." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at him and noticed his hands were shaking. "Are you all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Before he could answer, he suddenly leaned forward and turned the radio off. "They can't know," he muttered, almost to himself. "Who can't know?" I asked, now genuinely alarmed. Them, he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. They're always listening. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of his words. Listen, if something happened, we should go to the police. No, he snapped, his voice filled with panic. You don't understand. They won't believe me. They never do. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who are they? I asked cautiously. But he didn't answer. Instead, he started muttering to himself, words that made no sense, mixing fragments of sentences about shadows, voices, and something he called the Watchers. I decided it was time to call for help. As discreetly as possible, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, keeping it hidden from his view. When the operator answered, I spoke as calmly as I could, giving them my location and explaining the situation. Within minutes, the flashing lights of a police car appeared in my rearview mirror. I pulled over, relieved to see the officers approaching. They asked us both to step out of the car. The man protested, but they gently restrained him, assuring him they were there to help. One of the officers took me aside. You did the right thing calling us, he said. This man is known to us. He escaped from a mental health facility earlier tonight. My heart pounded as I watched the stranger being gently led to the police car. His eyes met mine one last time, filled with a mix of confusion and fear. They'll never stop, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. As the police car drove away, I stood there in the rain, trying to process what had just happened. The officers reassured me that he would receive the help he needed, but the encounter left me shaken to my core. To this day, I still can't shake the feeling of those wide, terrified eyes staring into mine and his haunting words echoing in my mind. I no longer pick up hitchhikers, especially on stormy nights. My name is Peter, a pizza delivery driver. This job is usually uneventful, but occasionally I encounter interesting situations. However, tonight was a night I will never forget, a night of heavy rain and terrifying events. That night, the rain was pouring down, and the raindrops pounded on the windshield, severely limiting my visibility. I received an order to deliver pizza to a luxurious house on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, I was overwhelmed by the opulence of the house, with its large iron gate and towering walls. I rang the doorbell and waited in the rain. The gate opened, and a middle-aged man, dressed in silk pajamas, appeared. He looked tense and tired. He asked me to bring the pizza inside, saying his hands were occupied. This made me feel uncomfortable, but out of politeness and job responsibility, I agreed. Stepping into the house, I was immediately struck by its lavishness. However, the feeling of unease did not leave me. He led me to the living room, where the dim light from the large chandeliers created a mysterious atmosphere. As I placed the pizza on the table, he suddenly locked the door and invited me to stay for a drink. I just need to deliver the pizza, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's okay, just for a moment, he replied, his eyes darting around nervously. I began to feel that something was wrong. He showed signs of being an addict, with glazed eyes and erratic movements. I politely declined and asked to leave, but he stepped closer, his voice becoming urgent. Stay here. I need help. Don't go. The sense of danger was overwhelming, and I decided I couldn't stay any longer. I quickly opened the door and ran outside, leaving him standing in the house. The rain was coming down harder, and I dashed through the garden to get back to my car. But as I neared my car, I heard footsteps chasing after me. I turned to see him running towards me with a crazed look in his eyes. My heart pounded as I frantically searched my pockets for the car keys, only to drop them in my panic. In a state of terror, I picked up the keys and tried to unlock the car door, but my hands were slipping. He was almost upon me, and I had to act quickly. I threw my flashlight at him, causing him to hesitate for a moment. Taking advantage of that brief moment, I managed to unlock the car door, scramble inside, and lock the doors. He pounded on the car door, shouting and trying to open it. I started the engine, the wheels skidding on the mud before gaining traction and speeding away. I drove as fast as I could, leaving the terrifying house behind. When I returned to the store, I recounted the story to my manager and colleagues. Everyone was concerned and advised me to call the police. I followed their advice and provided all the details to the authorities. The next morning, the police contacted me and informed me that they had checked the house. They found signs of a struggle and discovered that the man had previously been arrested for assault and kidnapping. The house was actually a repossessed property that he had broken into. Hearing the news, I shuddered. If I hadn't decided to run when I did, I might have found myself in an unimaginable, dangerous situation. That horrifying rainy night has become an indelible memory, reminding me to always be cautious and trust my instincts in unusual situations. Terrifying night. I am John, a truck driver with over 10 years of experience driving long hauls. That night, I was on my way home after a long delivery trip. It was pouring rain, with drops pounding against the windshield, severely limiting my visibility. I had to turn the headlights up to their maximum brightness just to see a little better, but everything outside remained blurry and gloomy. The highway at night is usually deserted, and with the heavy rain and strong wind, everything became eerily quiet. I drove cautiously, maintaining a steady speed to ensure safety. Suddenly, in the hazy distance ahead, I felt my truck hit something. The impact made the truck jolt, and my heart pounded in my chest. I quickly pulled over to the side of the road, turned on the emergency lights, and got out to check. Under the truck's headlights, I carefully inspected the surroundings but saw no signs of a collision. There were no injured animals or obstacles on the road. I felt a bit puzzled and anxious. A sense of unease crept over me as I remembered the ghost stories about deserted roads at night. I tried to reassure myself that it was probably just an illusion caused by the heavy rain and the reflective light. Nevertheless, I decided to check once more. I turned on my flashlight and walked around the truck, examining every corner, but found nothing. I began to feel something was very wrong, as if an invisible pair of eyes were watching my every move. A cold wind blew, carrying raindrops that slapped against my face, making me shiver. Suddenly, I heard a faint giggle coming from somewhere in the darkness. It was the laughter of a child, light yet eerily unsettling. I turned around, trying to locate the sound, but all I saw was endless darkness. My heart beat faster, each thump louder than the last. Not wanting to stay any longer, I decided to get back in the truck and continue driving home. But as I approached the truck, I realized the doors were locked from the inside. I was certain I hadn't locked them when I got out. A deep sense of fear engulfed me. I pounded on the doors, trying to open them, but it was futile. Helpless and panicked, I sat down on the road, the rain still pouring down. In that moment, I felt a presence with me on that road. A chilling whisper echoed in my ear, "You shouldn't have stopped." I sprang to my feet, mustering all the courage I had, and ran back down the road without looking back. My heart felt like it would explode in my chest, each step heavy on the wet, cold road. When I reached a house by the road, I banged on the door for help. Thankfully, the homeowner opened the door and helped me call the police. When the police arrived at the scene, they found nothing unusual. My truck was still there, its doors wide open, as if they had never been locked. They found no signs of a collision or anyone else's presence. It was as if it had all been a nightmare in the pouring rain. To this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. But deep down, I know that something very strange and terrifying occurred on that rainy road. I used to be a skeptic about ghost stories, but after that night, everything changed. The Silent Storm, a highway nightmare. Long-haul driving is always a challenging job, but it also gives me a sense of freedom that few other jobs can offer. That day, I had accepted a delivery from the city to a small central province. It was already getting dark when I left the city, and the rain began to pour heavily. This season's rain always came suddenly, without warning, making the roads slippery and difficult to navigate. I had been driving for over 4 hours, winding through the mountainous roads, and finally reached the highway. The comforting feeling of driving on a straight, wide road helped me forget the fatigue and tension of the treacherous curves earlier. Inside the truck's cabin, the sound of rain hitting the windshield combined with the gentle music from the radio made me feel more at ease. This delivery wasn't urgent, so I could drive leisurely without having to push myself to speed up. On the highway, the headlights of other vehicles flickered in the rain, creating long, blurry streaks of light. I maintained a steady speed, eyes focused on the road, and hands firmly on the steering wheel. Everything seemed stable until I saw a faint shadow ahead. I hit the brakes and swerved slightly to avoid it, but suddenly the tires slipped on the wet road. The truck lost control, and I felt my heart drop out of my chest. The truck spun, sliding across the slippery road. I tried to regain control, but to no avail. It continued to skid and finally crashed hard into the guardrail. The impact was so strong that my head hit the steering wheel, my vision blurred, and my ears rang. In an instant, everything became hazy, and I felt pain all over my body. When I came to, I found myself slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down my face from a cut on my forehead. I tried to open the car door to get out, but it was jammed shut. Outside, the rain kept pouring, and water flowed through the broken window, making me shiver. I took out my phone to call for help, but in my panic, my hands trembled and I couldn't dial the number. After a few tries, I finally managed to call and report my situation. They said it would take about an hour to reach me because the area was quite remote and the rain was heavy. I hung up and waited in anxiety, trying to stay calm. The pain from my injuries made me uncomfortable, and the constant rain only added to my stress. While waiting, I started hearing strange noises around me. At first, it was a faint tapping on the truck's body, as if someone was trying to knock on the door. I looked around but saw no one, just darkness and rain. Then, there were indistinct whispers, as if someone was talking nearby. The whispering voices were unclear, but enough to send chills down my spine. I tried to listen more closely, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Fear began to engulf me, and I felt like I was about to cry. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the murky night. I felt like dozens of eyes were watching me from the darkness. My heart pounded, my hands shook, and I began to wonder if I was dreaming. But it was all too real, too vivid to be just a dream. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed from deep within the dark night, powerful and authoritative. The roar silenced everything in a frightening manner. No more whispers, no more rain, just absolute silence. I sat in the truck, not daring to move, feeling as if the whole world had come to a standstill. In that eerie silence, I started to feel that something was very wrong. I decided to leave the truck and find another place to take shelter. But when I opened the door, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. Standing right in the middle of the road was a large black bear, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. The bear stared at me, assessing me. Its fur was soaked with rain, with water droplets running down its glossy black coat. My heart raced, and I realized that the bear was getting closer. It wasn't just standing there. It was crouching down, preparing to attack. At that moment, I knew that if I didn't do something, I would become its dinner. I remembered that bears could be scared off by loud noises and bright lights, but I had nothing on hand to do that. I turned back to the cabin, desperately searching for something useful. All I found was a small flashlight and the truck's alarm horn. I turned on the flashlight, shining it directly into the bear's eyes, and simultaneously pressed the alarm horn. The shrill sound pierced the night, breaking the silence. The bear stopped, staring at the blinding light, then took a few steps back. I didn't dare breathe heavily. I just kept pressing the horn and shining the light at it. Finally, the bear turned and ran into the forest, disappearing into the thick rain. I slumped back into the seat, my hands still trembling. The radio crackled to life with the voices of the rescue team, informing me that they were almost there. When the headlights of the rescue vehicles appeared in the darkness, I knew I was safe. The rescuers helped me out of the truck and checked my condition. I told them what had happened, but they just looked at me with disbelief. On the way back, I looked back at the accident scene and saw that the bear had vanished as if it had never existed. My story became an unsolved mystery, and I knew I would never forget that night. The night I faced horror on the highway and nearly became prey for a wild bear. A haunting delivery. My name is Alex, and I work for DoorDash to make some extra money. One stormy night, I received an order to deliver to a rather strange address, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Although it felt a bit odd, I thought it was just a regular order, perhaps someone working late there. As I drove closer to the warehouse, I noticed the place was eerily quiet and deserted. The cold wind blew, bringing raindrops that splattered against the car windows. I parked in front of the warehouse, grabbed the food bag, and stepped out, trying to shield myself from the rain with my thin jacket. I walked to the front door of the warehouse and knocked. No one answered. After waiting for a while, I decided to call the customer to let them know I had arrived. When I pressed the call button, I heard the phone ring from the other end, and at the same time, I heard a phone ringing from the dark hallway inside the warehouse. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wondered why someone would leave their phone in such a dark place. It must be a coincidence, I told myself, trying to calm down. But the sense of unease kept growing. I called again, and this time the ringing was clearer, as if it was coming from somewhere very close. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps from the end of the hallway. A large, menacing figure slowly emerged. The man approached me with a threatening look in his eyes. "Did you order food?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes, I did. Thank you for bringing it all the way here," he said, his tone normal but still sending chills down my spine. "Can you bring it inside? I'm working at the back and it's not convenient for me to come out." "I think we should exchange the food here," I suggested, my anxiety increasing. "No, it's fine," he said reassuringly. "Just a few steps, don't worry." I hesitated, but then decided to step inside. Darkness enveloped me as I walked down the hallway. Each footstep echoed, creating an eerie sound in the quiet space. The man led me through a series of large doors into an area where the light was almost gone. "You can put the food bag in that corner," he pointed to a pitch-black corner of the warehouse. "Why can't we leave it here?" I asked, my unease growing stronger. "There are a lot of equipment here. It's not very convenient," he replied, his gaze strange and unstable. I felt a surge of fear and decided not to go any further. "I think I'll just leave it here if you don't mind," I said, my voice shaky. At that moment, I heard the phone ring again, but this time it came from the man's coat pocket. I suddenly realized he had lured me in. My heart pounded as he stepped closer, his eyes full of menace. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "You're not getting out of here easily," he said, his tone frightening. "You came at the right time. We need money, and you are the perfect opportunity." Without hesitating, I turned and ran as fast as I could towards my car. My heart pounded in my chest as I jumped in and drove away immediately, not daring to look back. The rain continued to pour, but I no longer felt cold or wet, just pure terror. A few hours later, when I was finally home and starting to feel safe again, my phone rang. It was the police. They told me the warehouse had been broken into, and the person who placed the order used a fake account with the intention of robbing delivery drivers. They warned me to be more careful and thanked me for leaving the scene quickly. I couldn't believe what I had just experienced. That night, I couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of that man and the ringing phone. Delivering food was supposed to be just a normal job, but from now on, I will always be more vigilant and careful, especially when delivering at night to deserted places. The haunting encounter in the deep forest. My name is John, a former American soldier. Many years have passed since I left the Vietnam battlefield, but the memories of my dear friend who sacrificed his life to save mine have always haunted me. Deciding to return to Vietnam to visit his grave, I packed my belongings and set off for a small village deep in the forest. That night, it was pouring rain. The rain pouring down like a waterfall. The road leading into the village became muddy and difficult to traverse. I got out of the car holding an old flashlight and began to make my way into the forest. The narrow dirt road was pitch dark, with only the faint beam of my flashlight guiding the way. I found my friend's grave, feeling a deep sense of sadness and regret. Sitting beside the grave, I lit incense, prayed, and talked to my friend as if it were the old days. The wind howled through the leaves, and the sound of raindrops hitting the ground created an eerie and spooky atmosphere. As the night grew darker, I felt something was wrong. The flashlight started to flicker, its light growing weaker. I stood up, preparing to leave, when I heard footsteps echoing from afar. At first, I thought it might be villagers passing by, but as the footsteps approached, I realized it was not. The footsteps were heavy, like someone wearing heavy armor. I turned around, the flashlight illuminating a shadowy figure. It was a tall man, dressed in a torn military uniform, his eyes empty and soulless. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized him as my dear friend who had died many years ago. I stammered, calling his name, but he did not respond, just stood there staring. I tried to move closer, but with each step, the surrounding space grew colder and more bizarre. The wind blew stronger, carrying with it eerie whispers like the voices of tormented souls. My friend slowly walked towards me, his empty eyes becoming increasingly terrifying. As he got closer, I could see his face clearly, pale and covered in battle scars. Suddenly he stopped and pointed towards the deep forest where a faint light glimmered from a small house. I understood that he wanted me to follow him. Curiosity and respect for my old friend compelled me to do so. We ventured deeper into the forest, each step filled with peril and anxiety. As we approached the house, I noticed strange images on the walls, drawings depicting horrifying and bizarre scenes. The house's door creaked open, and a cold draft blew out, sending shivers down my spine. I stepped inside, the house dark and filled with ancient objects, seemingly abandoned for a long time. My friend disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone in the cold house. I heard whispers around me, as if someone was talking, but the words were unclear. Suddenly, a cold hand touched my shoulder. I turned around but saw no one. Overwhelmed with fear, I hurriedly ran out of the house and back to my friend's grave. When I arrived, the grave was still there, but everything around it had become eerily silent. The rain had stopped, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the leaves. I sat down, panting, looking at the grave, and thanked my friend for bringing me back safely. I knew that what had happened that night was unexplainable, but it had etched itself deeply into my mind as a reminder of sacrifice and friendship. Since that night, whenever I think about the old battlefield and my friend who sacrificed himself, I always feel a special connection, as if he is still watching over and protecting me from the other side. A night of celebration. My name is Jake. That night, the rain poured down relentlessly, each drop hitting the car window like a drum beat. I had just left the birthday party of a close friend, where the atmosphere was filled with laughter, music, and joy. The memory of the evening was still fresh in my mind. Everyone had a great time, and it felt like a celebration we would remember for years to come. Driving my girlfriend Emily home, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of the night's festivities. Emily was still humming one of the songs we had danced to, her eyes shining with the remnants of the evening's excitement. We were both in high spirits, despite the heavy rain. As we approached Emily's house, I pulled over and kissed her goodnight. She stepped out of the car, her umbrella barely protecting her from the downpour. She waved and hurried inside, leaving me alone in the car, feeling a slight buzz from the drinks I had earlier. I started the engine again, ready to make the journey back to my place. The rain showed no signs of letting up, making the drive home feel like navigating through a waterfall. The wipers struggled to keep the windshield clear, and the road ahead was barely visible. The streets were eerily quiet, and the only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain. As I drove through the dark, forested area, the headlights casting long shadows on the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The party's joy seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by an unsettling silence. That's when I noticed it, a figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the rain. My heart skipped a beat, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I continued driving, trying to focus on the road, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Then, suddenly, the car's engine sputtered and died. The headlights dimmed, and I found myself stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness and rain. Panic set in as I tried to restart the car, but it refused to come back to life. The sense of isolation and vulnerability was overwhelming. I reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I was completely cut off, alone in the dark, with only the sound of the rain and the occasional rustle of leaves. Little did I know, the night was about to take a turn for the worse, and the real nightmare was just beginning. I sat in the car, my hands still trembling. The rain showed no signs of letting up, each drop hitting the car window with a steady rhythm that mirrored my rising fear. I tried to restart the car, but it was no use. The engine remained silent, as if the vehicle itself sensed the impending danger. I took out my phone to call for roadside assistance, but the signal was too weak to connect. I felt completely isolated in the middle of this forest. With no other options, I decided to stay in the car and wait until morning or until help arrived. But then strange sounds began to emerge. At first, they were soft whispers, eerie and haunting, as if someone was conversing just outside the car. The voices were indistinct but chilling enough to make my skin crawl. "I see him. He's right there," the first voice murmured, cold and distant like the wind rustling through the trees. "Don't let him escape. We need him," another voice responded, sounding like a hiss through clenched teeth. "What will we do with him?" A third voice, cold and ruthless, sent shivers down my spine. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the confined space of the car. I felt as though dozens of eyes were watching me from the darkness. My heart pounded, my hands shook, and I began to wonder if I was dreaming. But everything was too real, too vivid to be just a nightmare. "You can't escape," the voice hissed, cold and menacing. "You will pay," another voice said, filled with hatred. Fear enveloped me, and I felt on the verge of tears. I turned on the radio to drown out the voices, but the music only heightened my sense of dread. Suddenly, from the darkness outside, I saw a shadow pass by the car. It moved swiftly, indistinct but terrifying. At that moment, a roar echoed from deep within the forest, powerful and commanding. The roar silenced everything in a terrifying manner. No more whispers, no more rain, only absolute silence. I sat frozen in the car, too scared to move, feeling as if the world had stopped. Then the car's headlights suddenly went out, leaving me in complete darkness. My heart raced as I tried to turn the lights back on, but it was futile. I heard the sound of branches breaking and heavy footsteps approaching the car. I turned to look through the car window, straining to see in the darkness. Suddenly, a pale face with hollow eyes appeared right next to the window, making me scream in terror. The face vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me in utter horror. As I sat there trembling, the footsteps outside the car stopped. A heavy sigh echoed, and then everything went silent again. I didn't dare move, just sat there, waiting for help to arrive. As I sat in the car trying to calm myself, I realized something was terribly wrong. I felt as though I was being watched by unseen forces in the darkness. The weak light from my phone couldn't dispel the eerie feeling that surrounded me. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock on the back window. My heart pounded as I turned and saw a faint figure outside. My eyes met a pale face with hollow eyes staring at me from outside the window. I screamed in horror, but the face disappeared instantly. Desperation overwhelmed me, and I tried calling for help again. This time, I managed to connect with roadside assistance. I quickly explained my location and begged them to come immediately. They said it would take an hour to reach me. While waiting, I heard footsteps around the car, heavy breathing, and the whispers growing closer. I knew I couldn't stay in the car any longer. I opened the door and ran outside, hoping to find a safer place. But as soon as I stepped out of the car, I saw a large shadowy figure standing before me. I couldn't make out its shape, but it was massive and menacing. I backed away, my heart racing, trying to find a way to escape. But the shadowy figure moved closer, its heavy footsteps and strange noises filling the air. In a moment of panic, I grabbed a wooden stick from the ground. I raised it, ready to defend myself. But the shadowy figure suddenly stopped and vanished into the darkness. I couldn't believe my eyes, feeling like I had just escaped from a nightmare. The sound of the rescue truck's siren echoed from a distance. I ran towards the light, feeling like I had survived a life-and-death ordeal. When the rescue team arrived, they found me in a state of shock, my whole body trembling. I recounted everything that had happened, but they dismissed it as stress and fear. That night became a horrifying memory I could never forget. Every time I recall it, I still get chills down my spine, knowing I had experienced something incredibly strange and terrifying. Since then, I've always been more cautious when driving at night, especially through isolated forests. The haunting voices in the deep forest. My name is Michael, a forest ranger responsible for protecting the national forest. My daily job involves patrolling and ensuring no one trespasses or illegally logs the forest. That night, it was pouring rain, and the heavy raindrops fell on my car roof, creating a steady, heavy sound. I received a report from the ranger station about strange noises coming from deep within the forest. With a sense of worry and duty, I drove to the location, the car's headlights cutting through the darkness and rain, casting weak beams of light on the muddy dirt road. When I arrived, I grabbed my rifle from the back seat, checked the bullets, and stepped out of the car. Darkness enveloped everything, and the sound of the rain made the atmosphere even more eerie. I carefully advanced into the forest, each step filled with extreme tension. The strange noises persisted, sounding like eerie groans, unlike any animal I had ever heard. As I got closer, I began to see strange footprints deeply embedded in the wet ground. Large footprints, unlike those of humans or forest animals. My heart pounded harder as I tried to stay calm and continued deeper into the forest. The flashlight beam created dancing shadows among the towering trees. Suddenly, I heard a heavy breath behind me. I turned around, seeing nothing but darkness and falling rain. The breath didn't belong to any human, but seemed to come from something much larger. Continuing forward, I arrived at a clearing where the noises were more pronounced. In front of me was a horrifying sight. A towering creature, its skin wrinkled and wet as if it had just emerged from the ground. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, with a deep, hateful stare. It resembled no animal I had ever seen, and its presence sent chills down my spine. I raised my rifle, hands trembling. The creature moved closer, its breath mingling with the sound of the rain, creating an eerie symphony. I fired a warning shot, but it didn't seem to deter the creature. I stepped back, heart racing, sweat drenching my back. As the creature advanced, I remembered the emergency whistle I carried. Quickly, I pulled it out and blew as hard as I could. The piercing sound echoed through the night, startling the creature. It roared, an unnerving, angry sound, and then turned and fled into the dark depths of the forest. I collapsed to the ground, panting, hands still shaking. When I looked up, the creature had vanished, leaving only its deep footprints in the mud. After regaining my composure, I hurried back to the ranger station. Telling my colleagues about the encounter, none of them believed me. They thought I was hallucinating due to fatigue and job stress, but I knew what I had seen, and the fear continued to haunt me. Since that night, I have been much more cautious during my patrols. Every time it rains, I can't help but recall that terrifying night. The eerie voices, the heavy breaths, and those glowing eyes in the darkness still haunt me whenever I venture into the deep forest. The last passenger. Late at night, the city lay quietly under the dim streetlights. I, a taxi driver, was driving home after a long, exhausting night of work. Familiar streets slowly appeared, bringing with them the hope of a peaceful sleep. Most of the time, I picked up passengers in a hurry to get home after a long day. The job could be tiring, but I always found joy in their stories. Tonight, with the clock nearing 2 a.m., I decided to head back earlier than usual because I felt unusually fatigued. Driving through the empty streets, I savored the rare tranquility of the city. Suddenly, through the rearview mirror, I saw the figure of a person sitting in the back seat. I was startled because I was certain my car had been empty since dropping off my last passenger half an hour ago. The person was a man, sitting quietly, seemingly calm. I didn't remember picking him up, nor had there been any calls from him. A sense of unease began to rise within me. I didn't dare to look directly, only glancing through the rearview mirror. The man remained still, breathing evenly, without any expression. Each time I looked into his eyes, it felt as if he was seeing through my soul. The more I drove, the more unsettled I felt. The only sounds in the car were the steady hum of the engine and the faint breathing of the stranger. I wondered if I was imagining things, or if this was some kind of cruel joke. As it started to rain, my anxiety grew. The raindrops hitting the windshield created a tapping sound that matched the rapid beating of my heart. Suddenly, a thought flashed in my mind. Could this man be something other than human? Stories of ghosts that I'd heard from colleagues came flooding back. I remembered tales of mysterious passengers, lost souls seeking comfort. That thought sent a chill down my spine. I decided to drive to the nearest police station for help. But just as I was about to turn onto the road leading to the station, the car suddenly died. The lights went out, leaving me in complete darkness. I panicked, trying to restart the car, but to no avail. As I tried to stay calm, I could hear the steady breathing from the back. It only made me more anxious, my heart pounding. I picked up my phone to call someone, but there was no signal. Everything seemed to be working against me. I decided to step out of the car, hoping to find help from a nearby house. As I opened the car door, I glanced at the back seat one last time. The man was still there, his eyes staring straight at me, without a word. I quickly stepped out, filled with anxiety. I walked a short distance, trying to find lights from any house, but everything seemed to vanish into the thick darkness. I felt like I was being watched, but I didn't dare turn back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of a police car in the distance. I waved, hoping they would see me. The police car stopped, and I frantically told them everything. When the police checked my car, they found no one in the back seat. The taxi was empty, with no trace of the mysterious passenger. I was confused, wondering if it had all been a hallucination caused by fatigue. But every time I think back to that night, I can't forget the sense of terror. And since then, I always remind myself, never underestimate the strange things that can happen on those late night drives.
My name is Sarah, a young woman who had just experienced an unforgettable evening at a friend's party. It was a wonderful night filled with laughter and joy. The lively music, engaging conversations, and friendly smiles made the party perfect. I felt elated, my heart soaring with happiness as I immersed myself in the joyful atmosphere. Every moment was filled with delight, and I thought to myself that this was a party I would remember forever. As I drove home, still feeling the euphoria from the party, the atmosphere gradually shifted from cheerful to ominous as heavy rain began to fall. The rain was pouring down, pounding on the windshield, and severely limiting my visibility. The road from my friend's house to my home passed through a small forest. The car's headlights illuminated only a small area ahead, surrounded by darkness and the sound of rain pattering. Driving through the torrential rain, I suddenly gasped when I saw a tree fallen across the road. The heavy rain had uprooted the tree, blocking the way. Because of the rain, I couldn't brake in time and crashed straight into the tree, causing my car to break down and become undrivable. I took out my phone and called for roadside assistance, and they told me it would take an hour for them to arrive. Sitting alone in the car, I felt cold and scared. Outside was the dark forest, with only the sound of rain and occasionally the wind howling through the branches. I tried to stay calm, but suddenly I began to hear strange sounds. They were faint conversations, as if someone was talking nearby. The voices were whispers, unclear, but carried a haunting tone. "I see her. She's right there," the first voice said, as if observing my every move. "Don't let her go, we need her," another voice replied, sounding like a hiss through clenched teeth. "What are we going to do with her?" A third voice, cold and ruthless, made me shiver. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the forest in front of me. I felt as if dozens of eyes were watching me from the darkness. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, and I began to wonder if I was dreaming. But everything was too real, too vivid to be just a dream. "We won't let her escape," the first voice echoed again, this time sounding closer, as if the speaker was right next to the car. Fear began to engulf me, and I felt like I was about to cry. The voices kept coming, closer and clearer, as if they were closing in on me from all sides. Suddenly, a roar erupted from deep within the forest, powerful and commanding. The roar silenced everything in an eerie manner. No more whispers, no more rain, just an absolute silence. I sat in the car, too scared to move, feeling as if the world had come to a standstill. But then, something even more horrifying happened. The light from my headlights suddenly went out, leaving me in complete darkness. My heart raced as I tried to turn the lights back on, but it was futile. I heard the sound of branches breaking and heavy footsteps approaching the car. I turned to look through the car window, trying to see in the darkness. Suddenly, a pale face with hollow eyes appeared right next to the window, making me scream in terror. The face vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me in utter horror. While I was still trembling, the footsteps outside the car stopped. A heavy sigh echoed, and then everything went silent again. I didn't dare move, just sat there, waiting for the rescue team to arrive. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of the rescue truck's siren. They arrived and got me out of the terrifying situation. Once safe, I recounted what I had experienced. Everyone said I was probably just stressed and overly frightened, but I knew what I had heard and felt. That night became a horrifying memory I could never forget. Whenever I think back on it, I still get chills down my spine, knowing that I had experienced something incredibly strange and terrifying. Since then, I've always been more cautious when driving at night, especially through isolated forests.